One of my favorite shows of all time was Coil. This is a series that managed to pull off a futuristic sci-fi show that's believable. And that's something that I don't really give credit to many titles. It's so far in the future and there's so much technobabble and things that you just kind of have to accept exist. But Coil was different. It was a series that follows a bunch of kids that are getting into technology, but the technology itself, augmented reality and stuff, is something that I can believe existing not 20, 40 years in the future, but rather, several years in the future. So when I found out that Mitsuo Iso, the writer of that series, was going to make a successor to that series, not really necessarily claiming that it was going to be a sequel, but still, 15 years later, finally getting something in that vein, I was already super excited for the series. But did it live up to my expectations and my hype? That's what we're going to find out in this review of the 6-episode series, The Orbital Children, a series that is on Netflix right now. You can check it out, so let's jump into it. The Orbital Children, Extraterrestrial Boys and Girls, or Chikyuugai Shounen Shoujo, is a series that takes place in a future where mankind has traveled to space. But unfortunately, as we find out over time, things didn't go very well. At some point, they realize that any children that are born in space don't do well. They talk about how 15 children were born on the moon, and 10 of them died immediately. But thankfully, this AI system called Seven was there to kind of create an implant that they can inject into the children's brains that will kind of control hormones and other aspects of their bodily functions to allow them to kind of survive. It seems like infants in space don't do very well in growth. And after this particular incident, they kind of shut down this Seven. There's this fear that AI can get too smart, and they have to have these limiters to kind of suppress their knowledge. Now jump forward in time, we are now following a guy named Toya, and he is one of these children. One of these children that had an implant given to them that was born in space. And he's about to welcome a group of kids that are part of this program to bring children to space that are all coming to this particular space hotel for children that he lives in. He lives there along with Konoha, who is another one of these implanted children that was born in space. And you get an idea really quickly that Toya is trying to find some way of hacking into these implants because they're not dissolving like they should. And there's a fear that eventually, as they grow, they'll eventually die because of this implant. Even though this implant essentially kept them alive when they were younger, it is now the thing that might be their end. So he's looking desperately for a way to hack into it and find out what Seven, this AI that created it, had planned for it. But he's not a very sociable person, so having to welcome a bunch of kids into this place that's basically designed to keep him and take care of him, he's not too pleased about, especially when it comes to the fact that he seems to have some sort of hatred for Earth. This is this place, this homeland that essentially shut down the thing that was taking care of him. And there's a feeling that the children, the extraterrestrial children, the children that were born in space, were kind of abandoned by mankind. As they figured out this wasn't a thing that could be possible, they just all went back to Earth, and they left them behind. But this group of children that are coming here include Toyo, who we find out is actually a part of the UN. He's got some sort of connections to the UN. Mina, who is an aspiring influencer. She's trying so desperately to get lots and lots of followers on her social media. And then Hiroshi, her brother. But this visit doesn't stay happy and fun for very long, as really quickly an incident occurs. Some sort of comet comes by and just kind of throws the entire facility in disarray. And all these children and the adults that are at this facility are all desperately trying to figure out how to get to safety. As this facility is shutting down, there's a lot of holes in the facility, and there's dangers of oxygen and gravity and all this kind of stuff that are in play. All the while, the mysteries of what caused this comet and what might be working in the background are all being revealed as it goes along. So my thoughts on The Orbital Children, Extraterrestrial Boys and Girls. This series is, again, something I'm super excited about. I came into this absolutely hyped to no end. Again, I loved Coil, so this is coming from a perspective of somebody who loves Coil. Now, while I can't really say this has really references and stuff that I really captured, there was like one shot of a character that was obviously from Coil in one particular spot of the series, but it doesn't really seem like there was a hyper influence. There wasn't like, oh, this character has this character's last name. There wasn't really, familial bonds that were kind of connecting here between the two series. It really is just kind of, again, in the vein of that world, in that style of animation and character designs. So putting that aside, I love this series for the same reasons that I love Coil. Again, this is a very believable future and concepts within it that aren't too hard to really grab onto as being something that could happen in our future. A world where some characters are driven by social media, some are driven by technology and how it affects them personally, some that are driven by politics of the technology itself and how it influences them. So I found a lot of the characters very believable within this world, and additionally, the technology itself believable. Aside from, yes, the very later parts, which, let's be honest, with Den no Coil was the same problem. At some point, towards the later part, it really always feels like Ito just gets way in full of himself, and he starts to do some really crazy stuff that, yes, slowly over time, you're like, I'm losing that ability to really believe this world that you're doing. You're getting a little bit too far out there, but it's never to the point where it ruins it. I always love these worlds that Ito creates. And again, they're always worlds that I believe and I can see actually being real. I can see this being a future, not so far out. And like I kind of got into before, I think a lot of that helps in the idea that I like these characters. The characters are fun. Yeah, early on, Toya is very Char. I don't know, he's very Char Aznable. He's very much like the dirty earthlings are coming up here. We are the space people. You know, you're underneath us kind of mentality, but he has a reason for that. You really do understand this idea that he feels like Earth abandoned them. These are children that were born out in space, and now they're just there, being left behind. Mankind came out, they said, oh cool, this is awesome, let's do this, let's have children, and then they went, whoa, okay, let's go back to Earth. And it really does feel like they were abandoned. And it feels like the one thing that would give them answers to living a full life was taken from them. So you understand why Toya is kind of a jerk. I understood very quickly. I didn't have a problem with following him as a character. Mina was a lot of fun. She definitely feels like an influencer. I mean, I could totally see an influencer going up to space, even though she hates it, because she just wants followers. That's an influencer. But I did like the fact that technically Mina played a huge part in the overall story. That was what was surprising. Despite the fact that there were goofy, bubbly nature and constantly trying to record things, I could totally see an influencer doing that. Don't get me wrong. But in the end, she actually played a very critical role, despite the fact that, like, it seemed like for the most show, she was kind of just the comedy relief. Maybe probably the only character that I could see probably was a stretch for me was probably Taiyu. Taiyu was I am part of the UN, and it's like, well, how are you a part of the UN, and why do you have the ability that you have, and there was certain parts where it was like they're in a really bad spot, but yet he's still stuck on the fact that he's got to be the UN person to do something special. And it was kind of one of those moments like, we're doing that right now. Like, are we really going to are we doing that right now? Do we need to do this right now? And that was probably the worst part of it. Outside of that, I really liked the characters. Even Toya's uncle was really awesome. I thought he was a really solid character. There was a sense there that it felt like he was trying to push away Toya, but at the same time, there was a care there. But the overall story, the concept of the story itself it's obviously trying to say something. There was a little bit in there. I really did think early on it was going to be all about like followers and social media and that kind of crap, but thankfully it wasn't. Thankfully, it was kind of restrained to Mina. Mina was she had like 100,000 followers and she was trying to get to 100 million like Toya has. So there's a little bit of a jealousy there, and she's constantly looking at her follower count, but that wasn't the story. Based on the synopsis, it felt like there was this idea of all these children connected to social media and stuff like that, and then they get trapped up in space, and then they have to figure out a way of using technology, more limited technology, like peer-to-peer, not, the internet, to really function. But the story itself was really more focused on the concepts of really people from different backgrounds all coming to one place and pushing on this idea of kind of coming out of your shell. There was a lot of emphasis on the subject of the cradle, this idea of the safe place that people kind of find themselves in, and that definitely seemed like a message in the later parts, this idea of breaking out where you feel comfortable and really stepping out to where there's other people. A lot of emphasis on the idea of being stuck in what you believe to be true and not really looking outside of that. And yes, technically a lot of it being around the idea of a character feeling isolated, the feeling of being left betrayed by your own people, and the feelings behind that. And in the end, I think it pulled off some of that stuff really well. Yeah, it feels like it gets a little bit preachy at the end, but I don't feel like it was trying to shove it down my throat. It felt like it was there, but it wasn't really a significant thing. Like, I didn't have to acknowledge what they were trying to say. And to present this story was, I think, a really well done animation. There was, yes, times where they do use CGI, especially whenever Toya is on his little wheelchair cart thingy-majiggy. Sometimes with certain points when he's turning around a corner or something like that, it's like, ugh, it felt weird. It almost felt like fish eye looking movement. But the CGI itself, most of the time was really well covered up by the animation and the style. I like a lot of the character designs, a lot of the characters, a lot of fun, a lot of the reactions, a lot of the action scenes were really well done. I really did like the presentation of the show. Production Plus H, which pretty much is a new studio, did a really good job. Now, granted, this is supposed to be a film, a 2-part film in Japan, so it has a little bit of a higher funding behind it than most shows, but they've obviously split it up into 6 episodes to post on Netflix. But it's not really theatrical, bombastic levels of budget here. It really did feel like it was still in the realms of a TV show, but a higher end TV show. And that helps with a lot of the action scenes, which I found a lot of fun. There was a lot of points where the characters are trying to get somewhere. There's a threat that's there. They have to rush to somewhere, or there's a fight between 2 characters, and it did very well. And the ambient music and everything ramps up for it. Now, granted, the music itself isn't like stellar. This isn't like Sawano Hiroyuki or anything like that, but it was ambient enough and it gave enough energy to the scene that I felt it kind of added to it. I think if you wanted to pull some negatives out of me, for one, again, I felt like the end of it starts to get very Ito-ish. Like I said, it tries to do something that starts to pull itself out of the realm of believability into something that was more than that. There was one particular, oh no, you never knew this was the bad guy kind of thing halfway through it that I felt was a little bit jarring, but at the end, I understood why it was that way. But I think the only one that is like unforgivable for me is probably this very jarring scene transition that happens some point in the show in the later parts. There was a particular point in which something really bad happens on this spacecraft, and it really felt like I thought I skipped something. I honestly, it had one of those scene shifts where it's like everybody just kind of moves on and they don't really acknowledge what just happened. And it didn't make any sense to me. The character should have been a lot more impacted by this scene, and it almost felt as if they took this big chunk of the story and just pulled it out of there. Like there was a scene between these 2 scenes that should have been there, and I hated it. It was a very bad and jarring scene change, and I don't know what was going through their minds when they did it. All I'm assuming is that they felt like it was going to break the pacing of something, and I felt like it just jarred the entire story, and it doesn't make any sense. But overall, despite that, I really liked this show. It was a lot of fun. There was a lot of action pieces in here. The pacing kept it flowing. There was a lot of great points in the show. I love the technology. I love how believable it is. Even being from IT, there's some things that's like, whoa, that's a little bit of a stretch. It's stuff that's believable. And it's fun characters. And I enjoyed the characters. And I love their little venture. I love their striving to survive. That sense of some people feeling a little too comfortable in their own little bubble and then realizing, oh, I literally have to do something or I'm going to die. It has that sense in there still, that direness of what they're going through. And it didn't feel like the ending had a sense of crap, so where's the next chapter? It has one little scene in there that kind of gives a little bit of question mark as to what they can do going forward, but it was a nice wrap up. This is a conclusion that I don't really feel like I'm missing something, just more of the idea that there was a little tease in there that they could do something else with it. But that's my thoughts on the Orbital Children, Extraterrestrial Boys and Girls. Definitely a recommendation from me, especially if you're a fan of Dana Coyle and Mitsuo Ito's work in general. But yes, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, hit a like down below, comment, let me know what's thought of this series if you're going to be checking it out. Subscribe if you haven't already. Share this video if you can. Support us on Patreon. I'll throw our tips link in the description below. We definitely appreciate everybody that does, and y'all take care.